things change. That's just the way it works. Things are created. It's a whole different realm, a different way of thinking. And if you don't have faith for that, that's going to definitely get in the way of how far you're going to go down the obedience road. Luke 17, he just speaks the word, and it doesn't even sound like a word of healing. I think there's a lot of implications for what we've taken away from Jesus and tried to apply in terms of healing ministries. We also, in this story, it's a lot like the John 9 story, the blind guy, where he spits and he makes the clay and puts it on his eyes and tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. At what point was that John 9 guy, when was he healed? At what point? All we know is that he walked from here to there, which must have been quite a show to see a blind guy trying to make his way to a pool with this clay on his eyes in 100-degree weather that must not have been very comfortable. We don't think these things through, but we're talking about, like in Jerusalem, somebody putting clay on your eyes in the middle of the day that would have been really hot. He was blind. He wasn't paralyzed. He could feel it. The point is that we don't know at what point, and I want to encourage you again, because we pray for a lot of people, and we don't see a healing. It didn't work. Instead of saying, you know what? Sometimes there's a process. I don't know. We're not told how many steps did they take. 500? A mile? How long were they away from Jesus before they were cleansed? All we're told is they turned and they started going to the priests, and at the time that they were actually cleansed, healed, depending on the Bible you have, and by the way, these are different things, cleansed, healing, whatever. When they're cleansed, that's when the Samaritan reverses field and goes back. But they had to walk it out. At some point, bam, they looked and went, I am cleansed. The Jews, when it came to leprosy, they used the word for a variety of skin conditions. You got to remember, this is thousands of years ago. If somebody's flaking, it's leprosy. So it was used in a wide variety of skin conditions, and there is various kinds of leprosy and the way it develops and all that kind of thing. One thing that every Jew would agree on: if you had leprosy, you had sin. That was sin working its way out of your life, and that leprosy was judgment on your life. It was a punishment from God. No sense laughing at these guys, because there's Christians that think this way today. Something bad happens to somebody, well, they must have hidden sin in their lives. They got cancer, well, I've heard this stuff for years and years. This is very religious, Jewish kind of mindset of thinking. They're being punished because they have a sinful condition. And when you read the Old Testament, by the way, it is obvious that the Jews knew that leprosy was not contagious, not in the way we think of it. But they made sure that you didn't touch anybody that had any kind of a skin condition. Can you imagine nobody ever touching you? And on top of that, not touching you because you have a condition, because you're a sinner, and somebody's saying, no, don't get too close to me. I don't think we think enough about, a lot of times, not just the lepers I'm talking about here, but people that are around us right now, the way even Christians think about the people around them. When you get to Leviticus 13, Glory, would you read verses 45 and 46?
And the leper in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be rent, and his head bare, and he shall put a covering on his upper lip, and shall cry, unclean, unclean. All the days wherein the plague shall be in him, he shall be defiled, he is unclean, he shall dwell alone, without the camp, shall his habitation be.
In Numbers chapter 5, verses 1 and 2.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, and whoever becomes defiled by a corpse.
Both of those passages give it clear. The lepers were not allowed in the camp. They were not allowed to mingle with the normal people. If that wasn't bad enough, anytime anybody came around, they had to yell, unclean, unclean, as a sign to everybody else that I'm defiled. When you look at those two passages, and then you look at the interaction of the lepers with Jesus, this is how it hits me. I get fascinated. See, there were laws that were strictly in place to lepers. There were laws that were strictly in place for anybody else who was not a leper and how you would interact with them. These were their laws that they lived by. Except once you became a leper, the laws went out the window. And once you became a Jesus, the laws went out the window. Because the law could not cleanse a leper. All the law did was isolated them, ostracized them. There was nothing in the law that could save those lepers. And there was nothing in Jesus that was going to stop from saving lepers. What I'm trying to say is this, that it's quite clear that the lepers, Jesus, they're all breaking the law like crazy. They're not lawless, but they are lawbreakers because they recognize the law ain't getting the job done. You see, the lepers and Jesus are going beyond the law. They're doing what the law can't do. They're going beyond religion. They're doing what religion can't do. You can look at it that way if you want. For these lepers, like I said, they were isolated, they were ostracized. Even though Genesis 2 it says it's not good for man to be alone, quite clear, go over there, be alone. There were laws that I said, that forbid the lepers to approach clean people. You had to keep your distance. These lepers couldn't make a living. The only way they could feed themselves was by begging. And they carried this shame with them, ashamed of their condition, and they didn't do anything. Shame is an awful thing. And it's usually associated with something I've done. I feel ashamed for what I've done. But what do you do with shame that's put on you by an entire culture? And you didn't do anything. You happen to have a couple of marks. These are victims of the most serious nature, these lepers, this whole situation. And like I said earlier, the lepers found their unity, so to speak, in their disease, in their need. It didn't matter anymore who was a Jew, who was a Gentile, who was a Samaritan. None of those things mattered. There was only one place they could find belonging, and that was in their disease. Isn't that an awful thing? When you think about it, it's kind of like, how much worse can humanity get? You would think the one place and the one thing that should never happen, never happen, happens. You don't want to think too long about this. If you start thinking about our mental institutions, when you start thinking about our old folks home, you don't want to think about this too long, because we're going to find that we have a tendency of putting people in all these different places. Let's get them out of here so all of us normal people don't have to look at them. That Jesus tells them to go and show themselves to the priest. The thing about the leprosy, they couldn't go back into community, whether it was Galilee or Samaria. They couldn't go back into community without the priest's approval. That's what that was all about. Go show yourself to the priest. In other words, from here to there, by the time you get to a priest, you're going to be clean. And when you show him you're clean, you can re-enter community, kind of thing. The question is this. This story, to me, has to do with which community are you going to return to? That's the question. Because the one guy, he comes back to Jesus. 9 out of 10 are anxious to get back to the community that they came from. Which, whether it's Samaria or Galilee, doesn't matter. They just want to get back to where they came from. Which that community, by the way, not the kingdom, that community hovers around a different kind of disease. A worldly system, a worldly way of looking at things, lifestyles, comfort. You think of all it's obvious. The 9 don't come back. They don't come back to a community. They want to get back into a community of self-glorification. As long as I could do what I want to do, that's where I want to be. I want to be and do what I want to do and be. You read the story and it easily gets away from you. You don't notice the fact the Samaritan comes back. Now, I don't know about you, but if I send 10 guys that way and one comes back, I'm going to say, I thought I sent you that way. Didn't I tell you to go to the priest? What are you doing here? And Jesus doesn't do that. It's kind of funny. What was he really saying and doing? Glorifying, praising God, instead of going through the priests to get back into a community where that is far from their lips and lifestyle. Where are those 9? I mean, he asked them point blank, where are they? And you know what's so beautiful about it? You notice the Samaritan didn't say a word. He doesn't criticize him. He's just like Jesus, just like you say, just like Jesus. I'm not being critical of them. I'm not going to talk about them behind their back. We all know where they are, Jesus. Come on. They all got cleansed, didn't they? I mean, you were all walking together. You saw how you all got cleansed at the same time. 9 kept going that way. You're the only one that came back this way. 2 different communities. Which community? Where are they? Well, it doesn't matter. This is very interesting. In verse 18, our Bibles might say a variety of things. It might say stranger. It might say foreigner. There's different English words for when Jesus refers to the foreigner. That word's only used there in the New Testament. It's not used anyplace else because it's really hard to apply to anything else. It's an unusual word that we just look at in English. This is why I like to study the Bible, because you find things that don't come out in the English. It's a word that means another race. It's not used for Gentiles. It's not used for Samaritans. It's another race. Well, what race? Another one. Then what? Then all the ones you think about. I never heard of that one. Exactly. It's another race. Yeah. Jesus, when he uses the word foreigner for this guy, so this foreigner is the only one that came back. What he's really saying is this guy represents a different thing altogether. While you guys are all looking at all these, this one represents something entirely different. Jesus does use the word Samaritan in the other Gospels. He talks about Samaritans in Samaria. He's not reluctant to do that. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, he's a Samaritan. He doesn't call this guy, Luke calls him a Samaritan. Jesus calls him something else. It's fascinating. I call him this. Well, what does Jesus call him? Because that's all that really matters. I see him as this. Well, how does Jesus see him? Because that's where the rubber meets the road. Better get with the Jesus eyesight. Because he's looking at things differently. He's talking to people differently. He's touching people that we don't want to touch.